First, let me introduce myself. My name is Thano. I live in Albania, and I'm in my early teens. I always had a strong affection for paranormal and religious stories, so I have been dealing with religious and theological books since I was around 4 or 5. My grandparents were very religious and taught me to be righteous and sincere with everybody. Anyway, let's skip to my story. When I was a child, 2 years old, my paternal grandmother was diagnosed with liver cancer. The doctors couldn't do anything about her, just to implant an artificial item that would assist the remaining liver. My grandmother came to Greece, the place where I lived until I was 5, and decided to make the surgery there. One day before the surgery, my father saw a vision, not a dream. My father just got home late from work and went to bed. I was sleeping in a small bed while my mother was watching TV. My father took a shower, drank a glass of milk, and went to bed. My parents turned off the TV and fell asleep. After a few hours, around 4 a.m., my father suddenly woke up. He heard a loud noise coming from outside the house. My mother didn't wake up, only my father. Suddenly, he heard the doorknob turn, and the door started slowly opening. My father was staring at the door and was terrified to see the Archangel of Death standing at the open door. My father describes him as being tall, thin, and muscular, and having a pair of black feathered wings. He had a hood and had pale skin, along with black eyes and hair. He held a large scythe in his hand and a large cloak covering his thin body. He started staring at my father for a few seconds. My father went from being terrified to curious and confused. My father asked him, "What do you want? Why are you here?" However, the angel didn't respond, just kept staring at my father. Finally, my father got the point of the angel's visit and asked, "Is my mother going to die?" Death closed his eyes and lowered his head, showing sadness and desperation. He slowly left the room and closed the door, leaving my father alone. The next morning, my father went to church near our house and told the priest about the vision and the encounter with the angel. The priest got terrified and told my father that the angel is called Ezrael and is the Archangel of Death. A few days later, my grandmother had the surgery, and it was unsuccessful. She died a few days after the surgery. My father remembered Ezrael and sadness that he showed when my father asked him. Nowadays we live in Albania, and my father still tells the story every time that I ask him about grandmother. It terrifies me when I think that I have stood in the same room with death long ago, and that my father actually spoke to him. I haven't been in that room for a long time, maybe 10 years, and I'm afraid to go in. I've been many times in Greece, but never went to that room again. I'm just too afraid that I may meet Ezrael personally, although we will all meet him someday.
This is a personal account of mine, which dates back to the late 1970s when I was about 19 or 20 years old. I was living in a house me and my roommates believed to be haunted, and it increased my paranormal interest. I was also actively working to make myself more sensitive to spirits, mainly through meditation. I had developed enough skill to sense and sometimes see or hear spirits. I was out somewhere when I saw an old high school friend of mine. We decided to go sit in a coffee shop and catch up on lost times. He spilled coffee down the front of his shirt and asked me to take him home so he could change. He wanted to show me some party clubs he knew later that evening. On the way, he told me a few of our other high school friends lived there too. They were all roommates. We arrived to an older home. It was huge, probably built in the 1930s. He ran upstairs to change and told me to do a self-tour of the place. Nobody else was there. The living room was huge, 10-foot ceilings and a fireplace. The kitchen looked original but well kept and well preserved. I had to use the bathroom and noticed the facility at the end of the long hallway, so I made my way down it. Something moving caught my eye in one of the rooms, and I turned to find something that stood about 8 feet tall, fairly vivid, and not happy I was there. It had short, stocky legs, comparable to the rest of him, and his hands dragged to the ground. I could not see the face as it was disoriented. I stood there for about 5 to 10 seconds staring, when I clearly heard it order me to get out. In a low, gruff tone, I backed out of the hallway away from the room, calling to my friend, "I'll wait outside in the car," before stepping out. I waited outside and said a prayer for those inside. I did not tell anyone of my experience at the time. I felt that I should not mess with whatever it may be. A close psychic friend who we called Bird was invited to a party several months later. Yes, the party was at that house. The only thing I told her was to be careful. I called her a few days later to see how the party went. She told me she was choked while in the bathroom and had an incident which she refused to elaborate about. It was then I told her of my own account, which made her quite upset that I didn't warn her about it. Another one of my roommates went to the party as well. He said he was pushed by something he couldn't see and felt threatened by it in their bathroom. I talked to an old friend a couple of years later after that. I knew her from high school and she dated the guy who occupied that room. I told her of my experience and those of my friends. She said she could hear knocking on the walls at night, which kept her up. Her boyfriend who lived in the room was an ex-football player, and he was built like a tank. He had a harmless teddy bear attitude until he moved into that house. Things went downhill until eventually becoming violent with everyone there. He was eventually told to leave and made an incident requiring the police.
This happened to me and my friends in 1988, but we were actually just talking about it again the other day, and I thought I would share it to see if anyone has a thought of what it could have been. To give some background, this story involves myself, my boyfriend Andy, his cousin Mark, and his girlfriend Tracy. It was a Saturday night, and we were doing our usual weekend thing of riding quads up in the mountains behind Andy's house. His family owns several hundred acres, so we were on his property, and this is property that had been in his family for as far back as the early 1900s. The property had 4 houses on it and a huge garage. All of our parents were down at the main house, just hanging out and playing cards. As I stated, this was the norm for us on the weekends. This particular weekend, my quad was not running very well, and since we didn't want to deal with it breaking down while we were up on the trails, I just rode with Andy. We had been riding for about an hour, and decided to stop and take a break. We had a little place we had kind of set up off the trail with logs so we could sit and hang out. The night was a full moon, so we really had no need for any lights. We could see pretty much everything. It was beautiful. So we were sitting there talking about stuff and laughing and joking when all of a sudden Tracy got the most terrified look on her face. She was looking straight behind me, and she began to shake, and she had tears streaming down her face. I stood up and walked over to her and asked her what was wrong, but she was literally frozen in fear. I turned and looked in that direction that she was looking, and that was when I first saw it. I stood straight up and kind of stood in front of Tracy. I grabbed Andy and told him to look at the top of the tree line, and he grabbed Mark. I wanted to make sure that we all saw what Tracy was looking at. I'm going to describe to you what we saw in the best way I can. It had a big husky body like a bear, but its head looked like something you would see on a caveman. It was on all 4s, and its leg looked like horse legs. Nothing on this thing looked like it belonged on it. It was like it was morphed into all kinds of different things. Its eyes were blue, like what you would see on a flame. Needless to say, we were scared. This thing was starting to growl at us. It slowly stepped forward. We started backing up. I told Tracy not to run, but to just start making her way back to her quad and put it in neutral and start backing it up. We got her going, and she was making her way back down the trail to a spot where she could just coast down the trail when that thing lunged at us. We got on our quads, and Andy grabbed his rifle that he keeps with him and fired a warning shot at it, and to also get the attention of the adults at the house. That was our way of letting them know that there was a problem, since there were no cell phones. So as we were making our way down the trail, Andy was walking backwards, keeping an eye on the thing, because it was still kind of stalking us. You could see it because of its eyes. We were about halfway down when his dad and uncles reached us, and Tracy basically collapsed at their feet. They thought something was medically wrong, and that was when Mark told them to look down the trail and look for the blue flaming eyes. His uncle spotted it and turned his spotlight on it, and we were stunned to say the least. This thing had no hair, and it looked as though it was inside out or something. It was the nastiest thing I've ever seen in my life. Now, not to upset anyone, but they did start shooting at it. They thought they had hit it, but we were not able to track any blood, or tracks for that matter. We went back down to the house for the rest of the night, and the next morning, we all gathered and went back up looking for anything that would lead us to that thing, or where it had come from. We could find no trace of anything, and we never saw it again. Tracy never went back out with us, because she was completely terrified. I have always been fascinated with things that may be paranormal. The whole time I was looking at this thing, that was what kept going through my mind. I truly believe that this was some kind of demon, goblin, or whatever word you want to give it. So we continued to go out regularly, and was just a little bit more mindful of our surroundings, but never saw it again.
I'm a 20-year-old female living in Ontario, Canada. The incident that I am going to relate took place 10 years ago, but it has been bothering me ever since. When I found this site, I decided to share my story and see if anyone has any opinions. Of course, as it was an entire decade ago, this is by no means an urgent request for information, as the monster, or whatever it was, has not reappeared since. I suppose I'm just more curious than anything else, and want to know if anyone else has seen anything similar. What I am going to do is describe the room and what I saw, and then explain why it couldn't have been a dream. Of course, as it was an entire decade ago, this is by no means an urgent request for information, as the monster, or whatever it was, has not reappeared since. I suppose I'm just more curious than anything else, and want to know if anyone else has seen anything similar. What I am going to do is describe the room and what I saw, and then explain why it couldn't have been a dream. I sleep in the same room as I did when I was 10, but the layout has since changed. When this story takes place, my bed was in the corner of the room, so the headboard was against one wall and the right side was against the other. At the foot of my bed was a cabinet which was not pushed against the wall because there was an electrical outlet behind it, which my lamp plugged into. The cabinet was maybe 4 or 5 inches away from the wall. The door to my room is in the corner furthest from the bed. Also, there is a street lamp right outside my window, so even at night my room is never dark. When I was a kid, I would never close my eyes while waiting to fall asleep. I don't really know why. I would lay in bed listening to books on tape and stare at the ceiling. But after what I saw that night when I was 10, I always kept my eyes tightly shut. The first thing that happened was I heard a soft creak and looked to see one of the doors of my cabinet opening gently, not abruptly at all, and then it closed just as softly. At this point, I was not afraid. I was actually oddly calm considering how nervous of a child I was. I remember thinking, it must have been the wind, which makes no sense because even if the wind could have done that, my window was closed. Then I saw it, a monster or creature or something, I don't know. In the space between my cabinet and the wall, I saw a face. It was green with red eyes and had horribly fat red lips. It had a very skinny body with long arms. The body was humanoid. Its head was very round and looked smooth. I did nothing for a moment, but then it gave me this terrible grin and I bolted from my room all the way to the basement where my father was working, and I told him. Of course he couldn't find anything. He told me it was just a nightmare and made me go back to bed. I would be tempted to believe it was just a dream, but there are 3 reasons I know it couldn't have been. Firstly, my vision was not terrible at that age, but I did need glasses, which I obviously didn't wear to bed. When I saw that thing, it was visible but just a little bit blurry, and no dream I've had, no matter how realistic, has replicated my vision without glasses. Secondly, I never woke up. When I have a bad dream and wake up from it, it takes me a few minutes to reorient myself, realizing it was just a dream and that everything's okay. There was no transition like that. I saw the thing and ran. I never woke up. Thirdly, and lastly, I mentioned that I fall asleep listening to audiobooks. Well, I continued to hear my audiobook playing smoothly through the whole event, not stopping or distorting like I know it would have in a dream. I have never read that book since. After that, I never saw that thing again, although I had nightmares about it for the next year. If anyone has any ideas about this, I would love to hear them.
The story I'm about to unfold occurred in November 2005. It was just a normal Friday night. As I had planned to meet friends the following evening, I spent the night at home watching TV and in general just relaxing. About midnight I decided to go to bed. On this particular evening, just my father and I were at home. Since he had gone to bed earlier, it was my responsibility to turn off all the lights and lock up the house. On my way to bed, I passed the holy water font and blessed myself. This was an ordinary, nightly habit. At this stage in the story, I must point out that I am a practicing Catholic. My religious beliefs play an important role in my day-to-day life. That said, I do not publicly show this. Put simply, it is between my Savior Jesus Christ and me. Soon I was tucked up in bed. As an avid reader, I was reaching out for a book to enjoy, when a little booklet of the Holy Rosary caught my eye. It's important to note that the week prior to this, I had kept hearing about the wonderful graces given by our Blessed Lady for reciting the Rosary in her honor. Although claiming to be religious and well-versed in such matters, the Rosary was one prayer that confused me as a child. Well, that and the fact that it was so long. For these reasons, it was never on my prayer agenda, but for some unknown reason, I felt required to say it. As I already stated, I did not know how to go about it correctly, though. So during Saturday evening Mass, I mentally said to Jesus, "If you want me to say it, just give me a sign." All was forgotten until just after Mass, when I was waiting on my grandmother who was receiving confessions. Whilst waiting, I looked at some fresh flowers placed in front of an image of Our Lady when, to my astonishment, a step-by-step guide on how to say the Rosary was resting beside it. Having gone to this church for all my 24 years, I had never seen such a leaflet. I took the guide home with me, and that night said it in its entirety for all the holy souls in purgatory. My good intentions soon diminished until that Friday night. Seeing the booklet and taking my rosary beads in hand, I started it again. At 4:45 a.m. I awoke to my doorbell continuously ringing. I had obviously fallen asleep while saying it. At my door, I found my older sister, a little worse for wear. She had been out at her work Christmas party, and in the merriment had mislaid her key. I let her in and helped her to bed, while she told me of all the office scandal. Not wanting to wake my father as she was a little too loud, I informed her that she would have to fill me in on all the gossip the following morning. Now I found myself wide awake as I went back into my own room. I switched on my stereo to a low volume, switched off the light, and climbed happily into what was earlier a warm bed. I closed my eyes, plumped my pillow, and pulled up my duvet to my neck in anticipation of a snug sleep. In the background, I could hear a song being played that was the cheesy hit of the previous summer. I was contemplating how come such a song would be so popular, when all of a sudden I heard the most terrifying sound of my life. In the darkness of my room, about 10 inches from my face, I heard the most terrible growling in my life. It was so loud that I was sure that at any moment my father and sister would run into my room. My eyes were clamped shut in fear and my heart beating out of my chest. Although I did not see what was there, the image in my head was that of a snarling, evil dog. I felt pure evil that night. This evil had descended upon my room, and like the darkness was enveloping me. My immediate cry for help was to recite the Our Father aloud while blessing myself over and over again. I don't know when the growling stopped for sure. It was probably when I blessed myself. What I do know is that I got up and switched the light on as soon as possible, and for the rest of that night, said prayers until I drifted to sleep with the light on. I would like to say that there is no way I was dreaming when I heard this sound. I was completely awake and aware of my surroundings. Looking back, I feel it was the devil that visited me that night. I believe that somehow this experience has related to me saying the rosary. I believe that the rosary is a powerful prayer, one that the devil does not want us to use against him. This is only one supernatural experience of many that has occurred to me, but it is one that I hope will give hope to others of the power and protection of God. This is now my prayer before bed each night. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the divine power of God, cast into hell Satan and all of the evil spirits who roam throughout the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen.
About 7 years ago, this event took place in my house. My grandmother was really sick. She was in bed with oxygen to help her breathing. She was very devoted to God, a great woman, and always put her family first. I was ending my senior year, and I was very close with my grandmother. I suggested to my mother that we could put a mattress on the floor next to my nanny's bed so I could take care of her if she needed something throughout the night. One night, I was in the living room watching some TV before bed. The time was 22:30. My mom said goodnight and went to her bedroom. About 10 to 15 minutes later, I was getting tired, so I turned off the TV and then the light of the living room. The only light on was from my nanny's room, with the door open a crack across the living room. As soon as I took about 4 steps, I saw someone ducking in the middle of the room. My mom was playing tricks on me, I thought. But as soon as I took more steps, it didn't look human. It was darker than dark, on 4s, and features of the human body. Except it was thin, almost like bone appearance. I saw its profile of face, because it started to look towards the crack of light from Nanny's room. It was long, and bone features with some spikes on its head. I froze, and stayed looking at this thing, and didn't take my eyes off of it. In a matter of seconds, it started to move towards me on all 4s, very fast, and right through my legs, and vanished on the furniture behind me. I ran to the room, and didn't tell anyone. A week later, about 22:10, I went to Nanny's room, closed the door quiet behind me because she was sleeping. I started writing on my journal, and I heard a click very distinctively. I didn't pay much attention to that. After all, the house is quiet and you can hear noises. I started to hear my nanny sleep. I noticed that she looked uncomfortable, like she was having a nightmare. So softly, I got close to her and moved her arm gently to wake her up. "Nanny, Nanny, wake up!" repeatedly. She opened her eyes, very disturbed, and screamed, "Lock the door! Lock the door now!" No hesitation, I got up immediately, turned the lock, and turned the knob to check if it was locked, and realized I was opening the door. That click I heard minutes ago was the door locking. I asked Nanny what happened. This dark creature was sucking air out of my mouth. I cried, and I was speechless. I grabbed the Bible and read to her Psalms 99. This still haunts me. It makes me think if that thing made my nanny more sick. She passed away 2 weeks later.
My experience was quite puzzling. I know it's paranormal though, just don't know what it was. But I'll tell you as I remember and what I saw with my family one evening. Growing up, my family had a real strong bond. My aunts and uncles all live on the family farm, near my parents' home. There's a cluster of homes which is where we all live. We have livestock, sheeps, horses, and some cows which stay in our corrals. Each weekend we had family cookouts on most Sunday evenings. Just to eat good and mingle, we grilled meats, made side dishes to eat along with the main course. One evening we were outside of our house. It was our turn to host. Everyone took turns hosting the feastings. I remember it being almost 9 p.m. on a summer evening. It was hot even though the sun was gone. On the Navajo Reservation in northeast Arizona, the sun will not set until after 9 p.m. through summer. Up until the longest day of the year, the sun sets real late. Then the sun travels back down south slowly, also settling earlier each evening. Well, this evening I remember it was late. The sun glow was slowly going behind the ridge about 30 miles west of my home, but it was enough to still see. I was sitting near my cousin and brothers Alex and Jason. I don't remember what we were talking or laughing about, but I was facing in the direction of the sheep corral, which was about 600 to 800 south of my house. My parents, 2 uncles, their wives, my aunt and her hubby, my cousins and my 2 siblings, we were sitting on the back porch talking and relaxing. The sheep corral is made up of wood posts about 8 feet tall. I think 2.5 of that is buried under the sand in the ground, so you only see roughly 5 above ground of the post making the corral. The gate is made up of metal bars welded together in a square with tubes going in the middle. Covering the gate from the outside is metal sheets. If you're a Navajo, you'll know we use them to cover the roof of our hay barns, shades for animals, shades for houses, or sheds. Well, this is what I was looking at. The metal sheets of the gate which I saw clearly. I could see the gate because it was sort of a gray-white color because of the glow from the sun. Everything else around it was dark and black. I remember staring, spacing out, looking at the gate. All of a sudden I saw something walking in front of the gate. I sat up because I was slouching back in my chair. As I blinked and squinted looking at what it was, it looked very clear to me that it was the figure of a man walking. Then it stood there. I don't know which way it was looking, away from me or towards me, but it stood there. I know we were sitting in the darkness because of the flies and insects were attracted to the porch lights. We weren't too loud either. At this moment I got up and told my dad and everyone, "Look!" My uncle mentioned it might be someone trying to steal some sheeps or kill the sheeps. The sheeps belonged to my aunt and her hubby, so I got up. As I went to walk off the porch steps, my dad said, "Wait!" My dad, uncles, and cousins' brothers got up and started walking down the steps. We all walked slowly and quietly towards the corral. There's a wash between my house and the corral. From in the wash we could see there was a person standing in front of the corral. My dad whispered to my uncles, "Let's split. You guys go from the left, we'll come from the right. You boys go straight at it." Then we started walking towards it again. This thing knew we were coming. It started running away. It ran right by me and Jason. I was sure it was a man, but it was weird. As it was running, it sounded like horse hooves, not shoes running on the sand. We took off after it. We got real close to grabbing it while running full speed after it down the dirt road. Just as we were going to throw it down, it was gone just like that. We stopped. By that time, everyone caught up to us and asked what happened. Where did it go? It had a foul odor when we were chasing it. It smelled like dead cows. I don't know what we were chasing, but I thought it was a man. But hearing the steps when it was running, it sounded like a horse running, but it looked like a man. No one had a clue what it was or where it went, and as we walked back, my uncle came with a flashlight, so we tracked the path we came, looking for footprints. There was nothing but our footprints accounted for. Even near the corral, we only saw sheep and dog footprints. That was really strange. I don't know if it's a ghost, skinwalker, or whatever. All I know is it's something 7 guys couldn't explain.